for those of you who may be new to us and this format, every 3 months, all 3 of the Foundation Group sovereign trusts of Swift, George Eliot and Wye Valley come together to do a more comparative day of activity. We'll touch on it a bit later, but this morning we had a presentation in our workshop from Julian Hartley, the Chief Executive of NHS Providers, and then it did a deep dive into 2 of our 5 big strategic moves. The first was a deep dive into being a very flexible employer. Some really great work going on there, which Jeffrey Atuli and Gertie McPhillips briefed us on this morning. And then we had a session on supporting the domiciliary care market across Warwickshire and Herefordshire. And again, a series of really great presentations led by Becky, Rachel and John. So a productive morning already had. We have apologies from certain colleagues. So we will note that apologies from Simone Jordan, Kim Lee, David Mowbray, Andy Parker and Grace Quantock. And it's great that we've got Ravi with us, Robbie and Claire, who are deputising for some executive colleagues. So without further ado, do we have any new declarations of interest? Please raise a digital hand if you have anything new to declare. Okay, super, thank you. I also am delighted that we're joined by one of our new associate NEDs today, Joe Rouse from Wye Valley. So Joe, welcome. We hope you enjoy the afternoon. So we then have the minutes of the last set of meetings we had as a 3-group entity on the 1st of February. And I need these to be agreed by each of the individual boards. So the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of February are George Eliot colleagues. Are there any points of accuracy you would like to see amended? Please raise a digital hand. I can't see a digital hand raised by any George Eliot colleagues, so I'll take them as an accurate record and duly sign. The same for Swift colleagues, those minutes of the 1st of February. If there are any points of accuracy, please raise a digital hand. Again, I can't see a digital hand raised by any Swift colleagues, so I'll take them as an accurate record and duly sign. And then finally, Wye Valley colleagues, if there are any points of accuracy from those minutes, please raise a digital hand. Again, can't see a digital hand raised, so I'll take them again for Wye colleagues as an accurate record and duly sign. So we then trot into the matters arising from that meeting, and there was only one which has been duly completed, which was the financial planning for 23-24, which we will actually touch on, I'm sure, during the course of today. And that was productivity progress monitoring be added to the schedule of business, and that was done. Thank you, Chelsea. And then we have the group analytics update, which is scheduled to come back to us. I wasn't clear, Jane, when this was due to come back. Do you have a date for that, Jane Ives?
I don't think we've agreed a date yet. In fact, I've just handed leadership for that over to Adam, but I'd have thought maybe a couple of meetings time, Adam. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, agree. I'd say September at the latest.
Okay, super. Thank you, Adam, and thank you for taking on board that responsibility. I don't think there are any other matters arising. If you think there were, could you please raise a digital hand? Okay, super. We'll move on then. Well, I did give a bit of an overview of the key discussions from the Foundation Group workshop this morning. Glenn, is there anything you'd like to add to my comments?
No, I'd certainly, outside the meeting, welcome a bit of feedback from board colleagues. It's the first time we've moved into a slightly different format, which is in the workshop session, actually concentrating on the big moves that we've included in our strategy. And as you say, Russell, we looked at supporting domiciliary care and being a very flexible employer. I mean, I really enjoyed both of those actually, in terms of comparing and contrasting the work across the three trusts. So obviously in future meetings we'll talk about some of the other big moves, and that'll be equally as interesting. As you say, we started the morning with a presentation from Sir Julian Hartley, who's just taken over as NHS Providers Chief Exec. I think one of the things that I thought was particularly important about what he spoke about was the national move to widen the improvement training across the NHS. He did quite a lot of work in his previous trust in Leeds, but then led a national review just before he joined NHS Providers. So it was actually launched a couple of weeks ago at the National Chief Execs meeting, and it's been branded Impact. And it is about making sure that more of our workforce are trained in improvement skills, and that's something that we will be looking at, and I'll be discussing with the chief strategy officers. We've been doing CUSA training, and have got really great cultures across all three organisations, including the sharing events that take place regularly between them. But I think it's probably an opportunity now for us to move to more staff being trained in improvement in response to that strategy, but also widening that, as we already have, to some of our place partners as well, so that we're looking at improvement in pathways between health and social care. The work on the two big moves, so being a flexible employer, I think what I took away from that is this is vital for us to address the workforce challenges that we face, the NHS faces, and I think we've made a good case of why this is a big move and what it might entail, which is broader than just being flexible about people's employed hours. But what I'd like us to do is take that improvement methodology and do some more pilot work with teams, so that we can test out some of the ideas that our staff might have on this, and then as we do, roll those out across the organisations and across the group. And then on domiciliary care, obviously we've got the integration frontrunner work in Warwickshire, but great work in Herefordshire too. And it is in a better place. I mean, certainly the Pathway 1 flow is better than it was when we set this as a big move, but we shouldn't be complacent on this, because it will continue to be necessary for us to have more capacity in domiciliary care, more capacity in Pathway 1, so that we never have a situation where patients are being held back in hospital for any longer than they need to. The work I've been involved in on the National Discharge Task Force will also take us to a place where we will also stop just looking at the numbers of patients waiting into a situation where we look at the length of time they're waiting for discharge. So it's great to hear that we've set ourselves a 24-hour challenge in Warwickshire, albeit 1 week on, we've delivered that 24-hour from the point at which the care package is determined to actually delivering that discharge. So that's quite an ambitious one to hold on to, but it's so important that we don't keep people in hospital any longer than we need to for their own health and well-being and outcomes, but also from an economic position. The work in Herefordshire and the work in Warwickshire should make the case for investing more in that capacity and having less beds in the future. So no, I really enjoyed it, and I'm not sure what we've got scheduled for next time, but it will be one or two of the big moves that we'll be looking at next time.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And Glenn, anything more generally you'd like to add in terms of an introduction to today as to how you're seeing things across the two systems in which we operate?
I think one of the most difficult things we've been doing over the last few weeks has been trying to finalise the financial plans for both systems, and obviously each trust within those systems. And that's led us to a situation where we've got some particularly challenging cost improvement asks of everyone. Our focus, though, will continue to be on recruiting staff and reducing temporary labour, but also on effective flow through urgent care, protecting our elective capacity, and therefore generating income on the back of delivering the elective recovery, which is obviously treating patients more quickly than we would have otherwise done. So I'm comfortable with those two things being the main part of our focus on it, but it hasn't been made any easier by some of the challenges, such as the industrial action that we've seen, and therefore a thing that I'm very much hoping for is that we see some national resolution to that, so that we can have a really good summer and do some elective activity. And then also just one other final thing for me is the group has been approached to take part in a national sprint on improving waiting times in outpatients. And we're currently looking at what it would take for us to do that, but that would involve us doing more activity over the summer, particularly around some of our outpatient transformation work. And again, sharing that across the group, but also sharing it with probably about a dozen trusts across the country who've been selected to take part in it.
Thank you, Glenn. And it's good that these type of initiatives that we're getting involved in have really practical impacts on the citizens in which we serve. So we'll move on then. And if there are no questions, to the overview of performance and updates. So we'll go turn by turn, and I'll invite Jane Ives to go first on Wye Valley. So Jane, over to you, please.
I think we've agreed a running order, which is me, then Catherine, then Adam, in our prep. So we're just going to speak to our own organisations and what some of the benchmarking is telling us. So three key issues I wanted to talk about for Wye Valley. So the first is around the 4-hour performance. So the Wye Valley performance on type 1, which is emergency department only, is about middle of the pack nationally and regionally, but is well below what's being delivered at the other two organisations. And so there's lots of work for us to do there. So there's some really intensive staff engagement work that's going on. As you said, Glenn, that sort of CUSA, the conversation that we've had this morning with Julian Hartlim is very much that's the approach. So a number of PDSAs that are running, but also discussions with our group colleagues, particularly on frailty SDEC and how well George Eliot have done with their performance. So those teams are getting together and sharing best practice. So two things to the focus over the next few weeks. So by the time we next meet, we should have in place an improvement plan and a redesign which takes us forward. What that is certainly going to include is a reduction in the size of ED at Wye Valley. It's expanded hugely as part of the COVID infection prevention measures, and that is no longer fit for purpose. It's not aiding flow. It's just getting in the way, actually having too much space and too many people and too many nooks and crannies. So that's one part of the focus. The second part is then looking at our care at home strategy. So obviously virtual ward comes into that and some deep dive around that later. But also, as John mentioned this morning, that discharge to assess board, we've got a lot of resource going into discharge to assess, and we certainly don't think that we're getting best value out of that, and we're not getting the sort of flow and performance that we need. So a discharge to assess board that's across those integrated services are being set up in this month, and again, so we're looking to see some real improvement over the course of the summer, both in admission prevention and improving discharge. So lots of work going on around improving ED performance. The second area I wanted to draw attention to was cancer, and again in the deep dive section, I think we're going to be talking about the 28-day faster diagnosis standard. That's really improved. And again, if we look at the 62-day performance, so Wye Valley is best of the three organisations in 62-day, but it's only middle of the pack nationally. So again, lots of improvement work that's still needed on cancer. And then the third thing I wanted to talk about was mortality and SHIMI. So some really good news, some continued reduction in mortality through the SHIMI measure, which is, and there's been a continued focus over years that David Mowbray has led on that. So that's really good to see that continuing to improve. But there is an issue there in terms of HSMR, which is that hospital only, a slightly different measure, where all of our organisations seem to have a problem with what we're doing around palliative care coding, when actually that would move us to better than the national average. So some work going on again across the group on that. So those are the three things that I wanted to talk about, and I think Catherine was next.
Okay,
thank you, Jane.
Sorry, Catherine, just before you go on, any questions to Jane specifically? Please raise your digital hand. Okay, just one from me, Jane. Jane, what's worrying you most?
That's a difficult one. I think it's a bit about any performance, but I think probably it's the push on getting to financial balance is probably my biggest concern at the moment, and worried about some unintended consequences if we make the wrong decisions on that.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Okay, apologies to curb your enthusiasm for a moment there, Catherine. Catherine, over to you.
Enthusiasm intact, Russell. So I'll start off as the pack starts off with our access targets in the emergency department. Although we are performing slightly above the national average, that is a deteriorating position for us, and we have seen over the past few months, from about October time, a gradual decrease in our emergency performance on the 4-hour standard. That's directly linked to our bed occupancy, which you can see is showing in our figures here as 100%, and we can only report 100%, but actually we've got more than 100% of patients in our funded bed capacity. So a lot of our actions at the moment are around work that we need to do to improve that occupancy figure through creating capacity or reducing people's length of stay in hospital. Despite that, though, some of the measures, so one of the things you can see there is, again, our ambulance handover performance within 15 minutes has deteriorated, but actually our ambulance handover delays over an hour are some of the best in the country. And it was pleasing to see the Association of Ambulances Chief Executives use George Eliot as an exemplar around this. Our actual average time for ambulance handover is 21 minutes. So although the numbers are low for 15 minutes, patients are not waiting a lot longer, but that is still an area that we would like to meet that target and improve. In terms of another area of focus for us is around cancer, and Jane's touched on some of the areas that she's working on at Wye Valley. They're not different at George Eliot in terms of the demand that we're seeing for our cancer services has been high and stayed high, and we're now looking at some demand and capacity modelling. Patients waiting over 62 days for treatment is a concern for us, and that number of 63 is much higher than we would like it. And the teams in April ran a multidisciplinary event looking in detail at all of those 63 patients in order to work out what needed to happen to expedite their treatment. And that's been successful, and we'll run again on a monthly basis. Finally, in terms of RTT, performance very good nationally here. On this, we are showing the 3 patients that were waiting 78 weeks for treatment, which is in our ENT pathway. I'm pleased to report that those 3 patients have now received their treatment, and we met the national standard of having no patients waiting more than 78 weeks at the end of the financial year. In terms of that number of 52 weeks, the number has increased. That has been in some ways planned because we've been doing some maintenance work on 3 of our operating theatres attached to the day procedures unit. But that has now put laminar flow into those theatres, which means that they open on the 16th of May, just in time for Glenn to have signed us up for a lot of activity during the summer. So that work was well planned to do during the winter months that are a bit harder. And finally, in terms of the number of people occupying a bed who are considered fit for discharge, that is a bit of a success story. You can see the numbers, though a little volatile, the trend is downwards on that. And it was good to hear about the work that's going on in Warwickshire with the community response team in terms of making sure that patients who no longer need our services can get back to their own homes faster. Thanks very much, Russell. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. Any questions or perspectives to Catherine? And my MDs are getting an easy ride of it at the moment. Catherine, we talked a few months ago about some of the challenges for our ear, nose and throat patients. And I know a lot of work has been going on behind the scenes now. And I know Robin and the Coos have been involved in that, so thank you. Would you describe the situation as significantly better from where it was?
Yeah, so we're working with colleagues at Swift, which is one of the benefits of the foundation group, in order to provide a different pathway for patients. And I believe, Robin will correct me if I'm wrong, that we're now being approached by some other organisations in order to provide mutual aid for this group of patients. So I think in that sense, that is a significant improvement from where we were.
Thank you, Catherine. Robin, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to it is an addition, not to correct Catherine in any way. In terms of the additional work we've drawn in, we're looking at 30 patients from Leicester in order to help them under mutual aid for ENT now, which was a position that we wouldn't have been in previously with the previous service. So just to put a bit of context around that additional support that is given to the local population, but also to Leicestershire.
Okay, that's great. Well, we are all part of a national health service, so mutual aid is important. Thank you, Catherine. So if there are no other questions, we'll move on to Adam. Adam, over to you.
Thank you very much. Like my colleagues, I'm going to start with emergency performance. So I think for the last quarter of the year, performance remained challenging. We had a very difficult winter and we did see some improvements in the period January to March. I think there were a number of factors driving that. Obviously, we had a difficult winter and saw the impact of flu. Numbers generally were higher, and we saw a fair increase in our out of area conveyancing. So it's around 20%, which is about 6% higher than it was pre-COVID. Having said all that, we took the learning from the period and have put a lot of effort into improving flow, particularly for ED, and a number of initiatives to support performance. So we've had a particular focus on SDEC, which I know Harkamel is going to talk about later on the agenda. And we have converted our medical assessment area to a short stay area and worked on some of the processes there. I think that work that was put in by the teams in March has really paid off. So we ended March on 64% performance, and actually as a result of that work we've seen a considerable increase in April. So while it's not in this report yet, we actually finished April over 80%. So I think while it was a difficult last quarter, it allowed us to put some of those foundations in place, which has considerably improved performance since. I think on top of that, we've seen ambulance handover times continue to improve, and some of the work around how ED operates will also improve. The second area I want to raise is around cancer, and this is more of a challenge. And to preempt your question, Russell, I think this is probably my biggest area of concern. So in some areas, particularly colorectal, I think we've seen challenges. Performance isn't where we want it to be, and we've that's been compounded by higher referrals than ever. So I think taking colorectal as an example, we saw our highest referral month at the end of 2022, and consistently referral rates have been significantly higher than we were seeing pre-COVID. I think that's led the teams to doing quite a lot of work to understand the new normal and do a bit of pathway redesign work. So we're looking at doing more straight to test. We're doing some work with our GPs to streamline processes. and there is certainly a lot of effort going into improving performance there, but it does remain a challenge. I think the final area I want to highlight is the national target for no 78-week waiters by the end of March. And I'm happy to say we met that target thanks to a considerable amount of effort from our elective care teams. As we've already referenced, we are looking at what more we can do this summer, and really we want to be in a position where we have no 52 weeks by the end of this year. But that will be a considerable ask for the teams, and we're working through the processes with elected to understand how we can get there now. I think those are the main things I wanted to highlight, Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions or perspectives to Adam? Adam, just okay. Ian, thank you.
It's not specifically to Adam, Russell. It's more a kind of a couple of comparative points for consideration, if you like, which is why I waited till the end rather than jumping in. And the first one is around, so on the medically fit for discharge, so those people occupying hospital beds who are fit to go home, and reading the commentary, because we've got the overall figures, and congratulations to George Eliot, that's an improving journey, although we are still struggling a little bit in terms of, I think it's regional average, but we segment those people into pathways 1, 2 and 3, I think it is, there might be 4, but including, depending on how much support they need in going home. And it would be helpful, I think, because the commentary references some of this, to know how many on each pathway we have, because the needs of those are different. So just, I thought in terms of comparative information, I would find that interesting, or not interesting, helpful to know. And the second one was around the sickness information, where we have it broken down by staff groups, and then the commentary starts to reference some of the reasons why people are off sick. And while I suspect they are common across the 3 trusts, so anxiety at the top and mental health and cold and flu and the like, comparative information about causes of sickness absence will be helpful as well, because again, the way we are responding to those will be could be instructive, the way we compare that and address that across the 3 trusts. So I just wanted to raise those as things that occurred to me as potential further points for comparison.
Really helpful, Ian. Thank you for that. We, as colleagues know, we've had the challenge to get an apples versus apples comparisons on some of the definitions, but points well made. Thank you. Glenn, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's a good point, particularly about the patients who are in an acute bed waiting for one of those pathways of care. I mean, in reality, though, this doesn't show the whole picture, because these are acute bed occupancy figures. And what we heard earlier, in fact, is that sometimes when there's an absence of domiciliary care capacity, we end up moving patients into bedded pathways, whether they're community hospital or care homes, which are slightly better than being in an acute setting, but still not as good as being home first. So I think there's huge opportunity for us to improve the flow into those pathways. And say these figures tell one story, but there's a bit more detail to it also.
No, absolutely, thank you. And any other questions? Can I just go back, Adam, to cancer? And you quite rightly refer to the demand increases that we've seen on the cancer pathways, and by the sounds of it, the very sensible work that's going on to try and make those more efficient and smoother for both the patient and us. But in terms of the supply of cancer consultants and services, I know we have had some challenges in that regard, and a lot of discussions on the coups, between the coups in Coventry and Warwickshire, the tertiary and the district generals. Are we seeing that situation starting to improve now?
I think Charles might want to answer that one for me.
Charles.
Yeah, there's been some intensive work on this, and I had a meeting yesterday afternoon with the system and the CMOs. The short answer is that we have some improvement because the oncology consultants are doing some extra sessions. There is a locum being employed and for Dr. Irwin's position, which I'm told is going to start in June. But to treat the underlying problem, which is a capacity gap between demand and what's required, there has been discussion about a more complicated review process, and I'm working hard to get this short-circuited, so we actually put in something to, bridge the gap while that's going on. And there's an outline agreement with system and with Professor Patel to do that. And there's a meeting next week with the CMOs and the COOs to try and give a definite answer, and also to firm up some mutual aid arrangements. So it's a bit better, and there's a clear way forward.
That's good, Charles. Can you keep us briefed on that? Because clearly our cancer performance for a number of years, and I'm talking about Swift and to a lesser extent George Eliot here, has not been where any of us have wanted it to. We know the supply of consultants is through a service level agreement, but it is important for citizens and their families during what is, in any case, an extremely stressful period, for them to get a faster service than they have been getting. So if you can keep us briefed at the next Swift board and Madge at the next George Eliot board, I think that would be very helpful and very appropriate to our citizens.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions or perspectives to the three MDs? I would just like to put on record, I think the 78-week performance was commendable, very well done. I know it was a requirement, but others in both our systems didn't deliver it, so we did. Thank you. And I'd also like to put on record my thanks to our operational and elective teams. I know that the combination of that push on 78 weeks, the increased demand, the various different strikes that have gone on, has caused enormous stresses and strains. So I do want to thank our operational teams and our frontline elective teams for all their work. And I think it is great, Glenn just referred to it in passing, but some of the national initiatives we're getting involved in to up the pace on outpatients and elective, I think is very pleasing and should serve our citizens well. So thank you all very much for your hard work in that regard. Well, shall we move on then to some of the deep dives into certain performance measures? And so I think first up is the virtual wards capacity work. And Robin, you're going to brief us on this, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to preface, the three deep dives we've done today come from the work that's now being generated through the operational steering group that we've set up across the foundation group, and I canvass an opinion of the teams that are working within that. So that's all of the chief operating officers, associated deputies, and other senior leaders and operational leaders across all three organisations as membership for that group, and canvass an opinion of those teams at the last meeting that I chaired. Without exception, everybody was taking value from that forum, and everybody was learning from each other, and they really valued the connections that have been made through that forum, and hopefully some of that will come through the snapshots that we've got for you on the three areas this afternoon to discuss. So I will start with talking through the virtual ward work that the teams have done. Harkamel will then talk through the same day emergency care, and Claire here for Andy will talk through the 28-day faster diagnosis standard. So if I may just share my screen just to talk through people through the presentation.
We can see that.
Hopefully, excellent. Thank you. Right, so just a quick summary on the presentation. Just to summarise exactly, sort of the teams were keen that they didn't miss the opportunity to get everything across if we were running short of time. They wanted to produce a summary slide. So this also picks up on a patient comment. And this is just one of many really positive comments that have come back from the patients. And again, it's really key that for the teams that are working on this, that they're really focused on this is about delivering patient care and making sure that the patients are getting that best optimal care that they can receive. So virtual wards have been a crucial part to our capacity plans over the winter period, and all organisations have had some level of virtual ward activity in place. And what this aims at is patients who are aiming to either admission avoidance, so patients who come into SDEC facilities or assessment areas where the teams look at them and say, actually, historically, you would have needed an acute admission, but actually through the pathways that have been set up through the virtual wards, we can send you home and we can remotely monitor you, and we can our teams can keep in touch in order to manage your acute pathway, but in the home environment. The other element of this is around some early supported discharge. So linking into what's already been talked about is that how do we get patients out of hospital quicker, and thus reducing the level of decompensation, particularly prevalent for some of our elderly patients, and also how we get people back into their familiar home environment, which we know is really important. The one thing this really has sort of pushed to the forefront is a change in culture for the clinical staff, particularly in the way that they practice. And it's been about building confidence, which is why often these pathways seem to take quite a little bit of time to embed, even when you've got the resource and the staffing model in place in which to deliver them. The common factor across all of them is that they do take time to embed and really gather momentum in terms of increasing the numbers of patients on these pathways, because it comes down to building clinical confidence with the clinicians as to what the virtual wards can actually deliver, how safe the patients will be on these wards, these virtual wards, and how that will work. And once they try that and they see that works very well, they build their confidence. So that's been a real key area. Likewise, what we heard about this morning in terms of increasing relationships with voluntary sector organisations and how they can support, and I put in the chat this morning about a Back to Health team at George Eliot, and how they're really keen with a group of volunteers engaged in a series of work streams to link in, so we can continually start to look at how we develop these pathways further. So the next slide goes on to talk about a little bit an overview of where we were at in 2022 and 2023 and the plan moving forward. So for each organisation there, we can see the capacity that the organisations were working to, and also the actual completed episodes of care, and the snapshot occupancy tells you how well utilised some of this capacity was. And that is an improving picture across all organisations. And that then moves into where we want to be in 2023-24. Now that's been affected slightly by some of the NHSE position on changing their position with terms of the funding available, and therefore some of the projections that the teams had in place for increased activity through virtual wards has had to be capped at current levels. So you'll see there that each of the organisations still has a considerable offering going forward into the new year. The other part of that slide is also noting the idea of a shared dashboard. So not only through this piece of work can we look at what we've already done and the learning we can take forward, but how do we work better together in future? And I think, as you said, Russell, looking at how we then make sure we are comparing apples and apples. So for future reports, that's much easier through a shared dashboard. And there's some examples on that slide that the team have already been working on of how they would achieve that. In terms of that vision going forward, so the activity on the next slide is clearly split between the different pathways, and you can very clearly see on there that each organisation has slightly different emphasis on some of their individual pathways. So one of the key areas of learning is for each organisation to work together to understand what the pathways are other organisations are using, and how we can, rather than reinvent the wheel, how we can transfer those models of care across the organisations and across our clinical teams. So that it's a really clear way to describe how the foundation group learning really does and can impact the patient care that's delivered and the services that are delivered. Some of the challenges are on there as well, and the way in which we use our IT system. So all three trusts use the Docobo system as in terms of a remote technical solution, and around the data sharing for the clinical delivery and performance management, and so how we take that forward into that combined dashboard. So the main challenges that we face and continue to face, particularly, I mean, the key one there really is around workforce recruitment. That's what's taken the time for all three organisations in terms of really getting the numbers increased, and therefore we continue to ensure that we fill the slots and the recruitment plans we've got, and all three organisations are on a good trajectory with that, and likewise now looking at how our data systems then can potentially interlink with some of the community data systems such as EMIS and Lorenzo, in terms of that linkage between the community and the acute trust activity. And also, I think, as was mentioned this morning by John Barnes, we're particularly looking at the community colleagues where there's some rural areas, and how that works, and how you make that a practical service to be delivered over a larger geographical area. So there's some of the main challenges that the teams have faced. And again, that slide goes into more detail specifically for each organisation to give a demonstration of the challenges that they've faced. So where we're working together, the key points: so developing joint site teams and allowing sharing of SOPs training and competencies, as I've said, the joint dashboard that I've mentioned, and also looking at any future business case support, lessons learned, and how we bring that together so we can really capitalise on the wisdom of crowds is put in here by the teams. So how do we use that collective understanding and knowledge to tackle some of those wicked problems together, so that we're not all reinventing the wheel, and we can see maximum efficiencies and development of the services going forward. And I'll pause there, Chair, if I may.
Thank you, Robin. Really useful presentation. Sorry, could you keep your slides up for a second, Robin?
Of course.
Just because there may be some things colleagues want to just put out. Questions and perspectives, Glenn?
So we've already looked at two of our big moves today, but this is one other big move, isn't it? Which is around Home First, supported by technology and partnerships. And I'm really pleased that we looked at this, because I think the more I look at it, the more I want to challenge whether we're being ambitious enough. And I think when you look at the data between the three different trusts, you see quite a variation in what we are doing and what specialties are covered by it, which would imply we could, if we took the best practice in each, then we could significantly ramp this up. And I'm conscious of something Robin said there about you need to build confidence in it, and therefore a lot of this has grown organically. But I think we should be trying to aim for more. Just by looking at the columns of numbers, if we achieve the best practice in each, then we'd have significantly more capacity. Now, some of this is being constrained by the resources being made available by national initiatives. But I would have thought by now we've also got the ability to prove the economic case for this, versus extra beds being opened up in acute sites versus elective activity being cancelled, that it would make sense to invest more in this capacity. But then there's also another challenge for me, that You know, we talk about whether we can recruit staff into it. Does it really need to be a separate group of staff, or is there an opportunity for us to be more generic about the way our specialties work between hospital and community to ideally manage more patients in a virtual ward environment?
No, points very well made, Glenn, and similar to those I was going to make. Robin, we are seeing your screen, and so some of us are getting slightly visual blindness with so many Glenn Burley's appearing.
Oh, I don't know. Is that better?
Yeah, it's perfect. Can you keep that slide up? Because I was going to make exactly the point Glenn made, which is at the moment, as a foundation group, by March 24, we're looking at about 250, 260 virtual beds. If we did the best in practice from everything, I think we could be close to 400. And that's got to be something which frees up flow and elective capacity. Fiona?
Yeah, thanks. A really great presentation. I agree with Glenn. There's something about sharing best practice between the group, isn't there, to convince the clinical teams. Well, my question was specifically around the recruitment. Recruitment is a problem everywhere, but it hasn't been traditionally in the community for Swift anyway. So, what's the specific problem there?
The recruitment, because of the skill sets we're looking at for the teams involved, that they're quite specific skill sets, and also we often find that or the historical models, people will look at adverts for jobs in the historical based models, either in the community or the acute trust, and because these sort of have a little hybrid of acute patients in the community, they are a different skill set of almost people with acute skill sets but wanting to work in the community. And so it is a slightly sort of nuanced area, but also the pace at which we've tried to recruit as well. Obviously, in a limited market for workforce, that it has just taken some time to get the right candidates through. And that's personally from a George Eliot perspective. I don't know whether any of the other teams have got anything specific from Y-Valley or Swift that they would like to share.
Okay, well, maybe pick that up as we go along, Robin, because we've got lots of questions.
Yep.
Thank you. Jane?
Yes, so two things really. One, you're absolutely right, Glenn. This is a floor and not a ceiling in terms of the ambition for the numbers. Really interested, Robin, as it gets going, to see the benchmarking and how that works. But I'm also really interested to understand what the differences are in sort of the operational models. You know, what's the hub, what's the 24/7 cover? So it's too much detail for here, but I'm really interested to get a real in-depth understanding of operationally how are we making this work.
There speaks an ex-co, but let's make sure that happens, because just going back to Glenn's point, which I fully endorse, we need to be more ambitious. I want us to be getting to 400 beds next year, not sort of 250. Robin, you've done the same thing as the Ian?
Yes, thanks. Really support the ambition on this. I've got one sort of slight nagging concern about it, which is we're creating virtual beds in order to free up actual hospital beds so that they can be more appropriately used for people who need to be in a hospital bed. How do we ensure that happens? I suppose my concern is about, firstly, we should see our medically fit for discharge beds reduce, and it may be too early to say whether that's happening yet, although I see Swift's been at this now for a year or more. But how do we avoid a situation where actually this is not an alternative service, it somehow becomes additional to? How do we avoid the worst case scenario of actually running virtual beds and actually having a hospital full and still having a medically fit for discharge problem?
I think my observation on that, Ian, would be if we are doing more elective work and getting rid of the horrendous backlogs that our citizens are facing at the moment by filling up those actual beds with more new patients who would otherwise be waiting, that's got to be a good day at the office. But what we're trying to do is to build capacity. And Glenn, anything you'd like to add on that?
No, as I say, I've just put a comment in the chat about we do need to really make sure that this is truly left shift. This is about patients who would otherwise be in hospital, rather than it being an enhanced care for patients who are already in a community setting. Actually, it does tie into some of the existing plans for this year's CPIP and some of the new plans for Wye Valley CPIP, that we need to make sure that we haven't got more beds available in the acute setting than we need to. So I think this is a key way of facilitating containing capacity into the right wards with the right staff, and not drifting into extra beds being open, whether it be in the winter or throughout the year, as we've seen in some cases. So it is that discipline for me of ensuring that when our hospital beds are nearing being full, that we look at flow and look at opportunity to place patients in the right setting, rather than just flexing up and increasing capacity.
Need to keep the pace going, team. Sarah, question.
Apologies if this is a bit operational, but it would just help my understanding of this. And Glenn, you alluded to it there about the left shift. So is the reality now, or the ambition, that people in community, patients in community, will be able to access a virtual ward without needing to go to A&E, or is still the route going to be A&E assessment virtual ward, as my sort of first question? And then my second, I think the slides are really great. I was just struggling to see, it talks about technology enabled, and both of the case studies there, I was just struggling to see what these people needed that was technology enabled, rather than sort of upskilled community nursing. And so my assumption is that there are more complex patients that we have now being looked after on virtual wards.
Okay, so if we can handle any other questions that colleagues are coming up with in the chat box, that would be helpful, because we are pushing time. But Sarah's questions, Glenn, on the first one.
I think Charles might be wanting to answer that question, so I'll let Charles come in first, and I'll come afterwards if necessary.
Okay, Charles.
Yeah, I mean, these patients are not delayed transfer of care patients. They're patients are having active medical intervention. They certainly don't have to go via ED. And the example of the frailty service is they're actually, the frailty team are dealing directly with paramedics and cutting out ED altogether, which is a particularly good model. An example of complexity would be somebody, say, with endocarditis being treated by the OPAT team, or other complicated deep-seated infections. But the reason I put my hand up was actually to sort of echo a little bit about the point that we've heard before, is that the real danger in this, that it is supply-led demand, and it could end up targeting unmet need. And we've got to be very mindful of that this is truly, you know, as Glenn says, left shift, and it's instead of rather than as well as.
Yeah, but the big opportunity and the big need for systems when there are such horrendous waiting lists is that we are able to free up flow to allow us to do more elective work. And in the PBR world, that has to be sensible. Glenn, did I see the royal finger guard then?
Yeah, it was just to pick up Sarah's second point about technology assisted virtual wards. Probably would be worth us spending, you know, we talk about workshop in the future, maybe just looking at some of those technology solutions. Some of them are really quite simple. I mean, and the easy example would be the Docabo service that we've been using. Some of that is in effect a using technology to create a virtual patient record which is updated in care homes, for example, but also the Docabo in the box solution that's gone for individual specialties that monitor particular indicators that those specialties have determined they want to keep an eye on. So, but a lot of this is quite simple, and there are some far more complicated ones and complex ones that we're looking at. But it might be worth us just talking about some of the things we're actually doing in a future workshop that are using technology to achieve this left shift.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Really good, interesting presentation, Robin. If we can make sure we pick up on those points of making sure Jane and others are briefed on some of the detail. Secondly, the fact that there is, I think, still a level of ambition that I want to see from George Eliot in particular. Just thinking about 40 virtual beds by next March, in my view, is so much a floor. It's a basement rather than a floor. So I would really encourage all of the crews to sort of build up that ambition, because this is a big opportunity as we enter 24 to really drive our elective work and flow even harder. So well done. We move on then to ESTEC and same-day emergency care. Harkmel. We can see that, thank you.
Do that, perfect. So I'm going to talk to you about the work that we've done with same-day emergency care. It followed the same format that Robin alluded to, with our teams coming together to share best practice and also get a bit of an understanding about where we are now. So I'll try not to go through the slides in too much detail, but essentially ESTEC is same-day emergency care, which is where patients are enabled to be cared for on the same day by a specialist, either via A&E or directly streamed through the relevant ESTEC area. And the benefit of that is if you see a specialist as soon as you arrive to hospital, you're less likely to be admitted. And then if you are admitted, you're admitted with a plan. So your length of stay on average is lower. So it absolutely is the way that we want to be treating our patients on the emergency pathway. That said, the single biggest challenge to achieving same-day emergency care is bedding into all of those areas. And Adam alluded to it in terms of our A&E performance over the first quarter, winter pressures, and when you're really up against it and you're seeing that demand right in front of you, if you've got those beds, you tend to bed into them, because it's the alternative is keeping patients waiting in an area that really isn't suitable. So we all recognise that is our sort of biggest Achilles heel with all of this. Across the group, we've got 12 same-day emergency care areas that vary between them. We all have medicine, frailty and surgical assessment areas to a greater or lesser extent. And Swift and Wye Valley have paediatric and early pregnancy. When we were looking at, by trust, what our biggest challenges were, each of us have tried to address those in different areas. So George Eliot put a hard stop to bedding into their ESTEC areas in June 2022. And you can see that there's been a marked improvement in the attendances to ESTEC from ED. They also looked at what the criteria would look like. So generally with ESTEC areas, you look at an inclusion criteria, which patient meets the criteria for admission to an ESTEC. Whereas George Eliot sort of changed the focus of that and looked at, if not, why not? And having that conversation, I think, changed the focus of the types of patients that could go through the ESTEC areas. They also looked at a push and pull model, and Wye Valley and we at Swift have done a similar thing. But as much as patients being pushed from ED into an ESTEC, ESTEC's taking responsibility for looking at the screen and looking at the patients who are coming in and going and directly just gathering them out. And certainly when A&Es are under pressure, that's sort of much harder to do. So it really helps if everybody is thinking in that same mindset. They also increased their senior decision hours that they were provided. And NHS elective asked them to be part of the Accelerator programme, which is fabulous and presents a real opportunity to the rest of us to learn from some of that. At Swift, we also had the major issue of bedding into our ESTEC areas, and we trialled a PDSA. So we did 7 days of extended same-day emergency care. So in order to get ready of this, we had to have a really big drive on clearing our ESTEC areas. We did this in January. It was no mean feat, I can tell you, against some of the operational pressures. But we provided an additional 230 hours of same-day emergency care. And through this, we had a real focus. Everyone was really engaged in trying to learn some of the lessons. And we identified many new ways of working. And I think it really demonstrated why we should not bed into SDEC areas, and really in real time provided like the evidence for that. I think people know it, but it's often quite hard to see it when you're sort of in the mire of it. So I was quite pleased that we chose to do it when we were under significant pressure. It really did strengthen our relationship with our GPs and our WMAS colleagues, and many of those pathways and those lessons have persisted, and we continue to kind of work on them. And we worked quite a bit on our one-on-one algorithms and what that direct access should look like. And we managed to get our triage time down to 16 minutes and increase our ED performance. And what we've done since that PDSA to make sure that we, as I keep going on about, do the real study bit of this, is try to look at where that investment was actually worthwhile, because to a greater or lesser extent, it had a bigger benefit. So for example, the paediatric assessment unit probably isn't worth it. It is, however, worth it during times of school holidays, or when you know that you've got pressures from the paediatric pathway. And what this PDSA enabled us to do was really gather that data and understand where to next, where is the art possible, and where are you going to get the biggest bang for your buck. For Wye Valley, they had the same challenge, but also they were challenged to increase their capacity and increase their zero length of stay throughput because of the way that the pathway was working at the time. And the solution to this was to build a purpose-built SDEC unit where it is physically enabled to be bedded. And that has clearly brought about some significant benefits. The graph sort of speaks for itself. There is still some work to do, however, on frailty, and that's because it is in a bay. So some of the things that we've talked about already, when it's in a bay, it's much easier to bed in, it's much harder to close. And then if you've got staffing issues, those issues are further compounded. And I know Wye Valley are looking at co-locating some of the SDECs and looking to see what the art possible is with virtual wards combined with the frailty SDEC, looking at their floor plan and look to see if you could expand the SDEC, what would that flow look like? And look at what those the opportunities are for the direct admissions from urgent community response, primary care, and the 2 ambulance services. Robin talked about this before, but one of the things that I think we've all taken from working together as a group is much easier when you're talking as ops colleagues of what you're actually measuring. So that whole apples to apples conversation, it was actually much easier when we were doing the virtual ward work and the SDEC work, because we all sort of knew what we were talking about. So building on that and having an ops-led dashboard that we can all compare with and that we're all sort of signed up to will be really helpful. And that's exactly what we did as part of this work. When we got together, we reviewed our data, and the presentation is a summary of that, to really try and understand what is it that we're seeing, where is it that we're learning, what are the clues that we all need to look to. Because following on from the previous discussion, I completely agree with the sentiment that we don't want to create beds for the sake of filling beds. But actually, we're talking about organisations that have got 95% plus bed occupancy. You know, on our worst day, we had 106% bed occupancy. I'm not convinced that we are close to having too many beds. And the benefits, the improvements that we've made to our ED performance over the last month have really been as a result of the sum of all the parts. And it's all these tiny incremental gains that I think really make a difference. And that certainly is the case with SDEC. So moving forward, we're going to continue the work to see what more we can learn around our SDEC activity. Certainly, we're putting together a business case at Swift to try and, or potentially another PDSA to follow up on some of the more nuanced bits to really understand where that opportunity is. I think clearly the hard stop at George Eliot and Wye Valley, just by virtue of closing the unit, has demonstrated significant improvements, and that's certainly something that we're seeking to learn from here. We also want to work towards a never event type governance, because really we should never be bedding into these areas, and if we are, then why? You know, was it really bad enough that it would warrant scuppering performance the next day? What are those trigger points, and is there anything that we can learn from doing real-time short root cause analysis type pieces of work? And I think what we learned is that actually with our SDEC, we've all got varying levels of experience and various staff models and skill mix arrangements. And through this work, we're going to look to see if there is a model that would that at either trust, starting with frailty, that would help each other along. And certainly, we're stronger, and all of us are stronger in one element than another. So that feels like a real opportunity for us to move forward from. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Harkamel. Questions and perspectives on SDEC? Oh, thank you, Glenn. Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see the way that these have evolved over the years, and some of that obviously has been the necessary evolution to build kind of confidence and trust that these pathways are effective. But again, it's a bit like the previous item. When you look at it between the three organisations, it's hard to work out whether one or other has got enough capacity based on the demographics. I realise the demographics are going to be slightly different. So I hope through the further work we're getting a position where we can try to right size SDEC. It feels at the moment like the constraint is its capacity rather than its demand, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think we recognise that as part of this work. It certainly started off as, what have we got? How does it work? How does it feel? Is there anything that we can learn quite quickly? But actually, you're right. And that's why I gave the example of the paediatric assessment unit. Whilst we included it in our PDSA, it isn't worth doing it in the extended way. And actually, we've learned that lesson now sort of for all the organisations. And one of the things that we have agreed that we need to do is, because our demand will be nuanced between the three, but actually the solution might not be. So the next phase has to be to try and understand the numbers and the granularity of this a little bit more. And actually, just because that might be true for us, that might be, the trend might be different at the other organisations. So by virtue of having the dashboard, we'll be able to see that a bit more in real time, and then that will give us the clues of where to invest our time in next.
Naj has raised a question in the chat box. Naj, do you want to ask it physically, just verbally, so to speak?
Yeah, thanks. So we've got an ED department which is fully integrated. I'm an advocate of admissions units, assessment units as being integrated, and I wonder whether any thought about an SDEC unit which is integrated. Partially we'd look at with one eye on the workforce. You can share, if you've got ACPs and junior workforce and nursing staff, and then just have your senior decision makers come in and make decisions. And what thoughts are?
To a certain extent, we've tried to co-locate as much as we can for exactly that reason, predominantly around the nursing staffing at Swift. And I'm not sure we've seen the benefits that we could have done. But seeing as you're an advocate, I might tie you into the next piece of work to see actually if you can review some of those medical models and if there is something obvious that we're missing.
Well, I tried it at Walsall many years ago. The people that threw the toys out the pram were the surgeons, as you would expect.
Thanks.
I think it's interesting. I think now, because it's so cramped and it's like we have such phenomenally busy days, the engagement in the SDECs, we've been pushing at a bit of an open door with this. And I think it's just more around getting that configuration right and understanding that local demand. But I think you're right, Naj, there are pockets where perhaps a bit more support would be helpful.
And education. Robbie?
I was just going to sort of expand on that really. So at Hereford, we are trying with the new acute floor. I think one of the proposals will be to expand our area so that we've got surgery, frailty and acute medicine all in the same area. And certainly currently we've already got surgery. Whether we could add gynae in there, although that tends to work reasonably well with its current pathway, so we probably wouldn't want to upset that. But absolutely trying to get that sort of front loading with an acute team rather than it necessarily being specialty specific, I think is definitely the way to go with SDEC.
Thanks, Robbie. And Naj, thanks for volunteering. I'm sure Harcombe will take up your kind offer and get those Christmas cards writing going for all of our surgical colleagues. So we'll move on then, if there are no more questions, on to the faster 28-day diagnosis for cancer. And Claire, again, thank you for stepping in today for Andy. Over to you.
Thank you, Russell. Can everyone see?
Yes, we can.
Lovely. Okay. So yes, as you say, I'm here to talk about the faster diagnosis standard. Just to say a bit about me in case people don't know me. I'm Claire Carlson, I'm the Associate Coup for Clinical Support Division in Wye Valley, which includes the sort of corporate oversight of cancer services, but also some of the key diagnostics. So they kind of fit very well together. So just really to describe what this is all about. So it was introduced just over 18 months ago in October 21 as part of the long-term NHS long-term plan, with the aim that by 2028, 55,000 more people each year will survive their cancer for 5 years or more. So it's a really crucial target to deliver. It also means that 75% of people will be diagnosed at an earlier stage. So moving on. So whilst there's variation month on month between the three organisations in terms of performance, all three trusts have made significant progress towards the 75% standard in February, and they're broadly comparable. But when we look at where we are, can you see that? Sorry. When we look at where we are nationally, we are in the sort of lower quartile of performance. And I think I'll be going on to some information about how we're actually benchmarking and looking at how we get into that higher quartile. So in terms of the overall performance, whilst we compare similarly for the overall target, there are significant variations between organisations across the tumour sites. And I think that's what the cancer managers have been discussing in terms of the opportunity for learning and improvement by comparing pathways and approaches where performance is better. And also focusing on the detail of pathways to look at eliminating waste and removing the barriers to achieving the standards. During the discussions putting together the presentation, there were some shared challenges that became evident fairly quickly across the group. One of them is that none of the sites have actually got a one-stop gynecology clinic, and I think the benefit of Team Brain will certainly help with getting that type of service together. Histopathology is a challenge across all sites in terms of turnaround times. We're certainly looking at, there was a document produced by NHS Improvement in 2010, so quite old but still very relevant, called the 7-day turnaround time challenge, and that's something that gives some really useful examples of how you can maximise the workflow in histopathology. Haematology performance is low on all sites, and that really is about small numbers causing the percentages, and quite often in haematology the 2-week wait pathway gets to them very late. Diagnostics capacity is an issue across all sites, in particular more often reporting than actual physical scanning. For example, in Wye Valley, we're able to book CT colonographies, but we have a 15 to 20 day reporting turnaround time. So we're working towards getting additional consultants to have that capability. The other thing that I think is within all of our gift to resolve and look at best practice is around admin delays, not only clinical consultant admin time to actually get to the 28-day decision, but also the capacity of admin teams to turn around results letters, etc. In terms of the main issues, there's a lot of detail on this slide. So what I was going to go through it one by one, but just sort of say that the common themes are obviously increases in referral volumes across all sites. The prioritisation process, there seems to be just a bit of a disconnect between the way that clinicians prioritise in clinic in terms of a 2-week wait urgent routine and how they're treated in histopathology across the 3 sites. So that's something that we're discussing as a group to look at. Obviously, I just mentioned delays in admin and typing, and also in terms of diagnostic capacity, endoscopy seems to be a theme across all sites. So what are we doing about this? So in terms of actions and improvements, I know that George Eliot just recently did a Cancer Focus Week, a MAID style event. We're actually copying that idea in July, and it really is to focus on education. What is the standard? Also deep dives by cancer tumour site, including, and we're also including diagnostics in terms of their contribution to the pathway. Also reviewing structures, what meetings, what communication, how information on cancer performance flows, embedding the cancer navigator roles, which are designed to be a specialty resource, but also we've got cancer navigators within radiology, and shortly going to put one into histopathology, because I think they've really proved their worth in terms of improving such a 63-day performance as well. And I think what's coming out of this work is a greater understanding of the interdependencies and how everything feeds into the MDT and how we can coordinate that much better. And finally, so what we're doing in terms of actions across the group, I think it's become evident that we would really like to do an admin review of job roles, not only with the MDT team, but also with the secretarial teams in the trusts and the effective cancer prioritisation process. And I think it'd be really good to do that work across all 3 sites. In terms of shared learning of improvements, I think from the differences in variation in performance, there's certainly a lot to learn between each other. And also radiology, the National Capacity and Demand tool, we're piloting as Wye Valley, and I think the other 2 trusts are engaged in that as well. And that will give us much better feel for our reporting capacity, which is one of the key issues around radiology delays. I think that's everything from me. Don't we just stop sharing?
No, leave the slides up if you can, Claire, just at the moment.
Yep.
Thank you. Cool questions and perspectives. Glenn?
It's another great area for sharing and improving across the group, isn't it? And I mean, clearly we need to do better. If you look at all 3 organisations, and this is such an important performance measure, quality outcome. One of the things I think I'd be really interested in as part of that sharing learning is, if we're not careful with this, and many other targets like it, we just do more, work harder, rather than innovate and change pathways. And it's comparing those pathways to see whether any one of us has got a different straight to test or whatever it might be pathway that we're missing the trick on trying to get those patients to the end of the journey more rapidly. So I'd certainly encourage an improvement approach, as well as just looking at the volumes and admin capacity.
And any other perspectives? I guess my observation on this, and it partly builds on what Glenn said, I think it would be good to set Frank, after you.
Thank you. I'm a bit concerned. We just heard admin and typing delays mentioned, and we discussed it this morning. When productivity is so important, how can we have admin and typing problems? Surely that's got to be one of the easier to fix.
Yeah, it's a good challenge, Frank. Why is it so difficult to fix, Claire?
Put me on the spot now. I think one of the things we're looking at Wye Valley is actually a buddy system, because I think when you get annual leave, sickness, etc., people tend to look within their sort of specialty silos. And I think one of the things we're encouraging is actually that flexibility between teams in terms of workflow, because the traditional model is obviously your consultant has his own secretary. But I think, you know, we need to modernise that in terms of spreading out the workload and just ensuring that the priority work gets done between a wider team.
Yeah,
Didn't we also discuss at length several years ago now, dictation typing?
Yeah, I think that's done in a lot of places, isn't it, Claire?
We have it in radiology. We don't at the moment, but I believe there was, Jane might know, a programme to look at a digital dictation platform. I'm not sure how far that's got.
Okay, don't want to stay too long on this, but it's clearly a relevant point. Jane, did you just want to come in?
I think you were talking about outsourcing rather than digital dictation. Yes, we are looking at digital dictation, but that wouldn't solve the problem, because the problem is that these medical secretaries have a role in then taking the patient and taking the action. So it's quite a complex problem. But Claire's absolutely right. Cross-covering, making sure we've got priority work covered all of the time with people who know what they're doing, I think is the answer to this.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Frank. Hold that thought though, Frank. keep us honest. And Sarah?
Just a quick point, really, on the patient sort of focus here. On several different deep dives I've been involved in with patients and cancer, one of the biggest things that they're waiting, that they say causes psychological distress, is that waiting for test results. And I think we use patient stories for ourselves at board often. I wonder whether the medical secretaries and some of those responsible for more administrative functions from time to time, I know they often deal with the brunt of patients on the telephone, but whether a reminder of their absolute key role in this and communicating and getting those things done in a timely manner, it just decreases people's psychological harm or gets them on the right treatment path quicker. And so perhaps just that reminder at times for those people on the front line but not in direct patient contact about how important their role is would be really useful. I know people are working at capacity, but I just found it interesting that was a patient perspective, that wait is the most often psychologically damaging thing for people.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with that, Sarah. And
Yeah.
I guess my observation would be, I'd quite like to see, when we are talking about pathways like this, where we are dependent on other partners as well, to identify clearly those things which are in our control, which we can sort. And we've been talking about some of those just now. From those parts of the delivery where we're dependent on other parties, whether it's a tertiary partner, whether it's part of the histopathology network or whatever, where we are dependent on a partner's performance and what we're doing about that. On occasion, when I'm reading the actions, it's a combination of the two. And I want to be really clear with members of the public, the things that are within our control, and those things where we're working with partners to improve performance, because I think it's important to be transparent in that regard, particularly in this area of cancer. Because if there's one thing, there are two things we know about cancer. The first is demand is only going up. The second thing we know about cancer is it is, like Sarah just said, one of the most fear-filled diagnoses you can have. And therefore we have a disproportionately important responsibility to help citizens and their families manage that anxiety, reduce that anxiety as quickly as possible. But we do need to recognise those are just two of the realities of what we're talking about there. Claire, thank you for standing into the breach. Well done. You can relax now.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to the PACE update, the productivity and clinical effectiveness work, which I know David Moon, I think, is going to brief us on. David.
Thanks, Russell. I'm going to be brief. The papers are in the pack. Glenn asked me to try and put together a little pack around what is the size of the prize. So I've tried to pick on 3 areas, and you'll notice there's big disparity in the opportunity. But I've also included a couple of other things around one of them. So one of the areas we looked at was cataracts. The GIRF recommendations are quite clear that if you're including trainees or training for trainees while you're operating, if you're doing an operation on average greater than 20 minutes, you still should be looking at doing at least 8 in a 4-hour session. And if you're managing to do an average operating time of less than 20 minutes, you should be looking at least 10. Interestingly, when we did the analysis by surgeon, the average at each trust was less than 20 minutes for a cataract. So all of the things being equal, we should be seeing at least 10 in every session. I'll update you on what Model Hospital says we're doing in a minute. We had a variation across clinicians where the highest was 23 minutes and the lowest was 11. So at that point in time, we were averaging at less than 6 at Swift and at Wye Valley, albeit Wye Valley do their ophthalmology cataracts in a different way to most trusts in terms of they have mixed lists, whereas the other trusts have dedicated cataract lists, so it does impact on it a bit. So there's a significant opportunity, or there was back at the time we did this exercise, at both Swift and a smaller value at Hereford, just because they don't have as many dedicated cataract lists. And at the time, to be fair, George Eliot were moving over from using New Medica to their own service, so they were actually implementing a minimum of 8 for each of their new surgeons. Roll forward to today, and in terms of cataracts per list, according to the model hospital, and this was only taken off last week, Wye Valley are actually top in the country at the moment at 9. I do question the validity of some of this data, but anyway, it is what it is. George Eliot are at 8 and Swift are at 7. There is significant opportunity for cataract operations. I would ask all COOs to just check whether they believe their return to the model hospital, because they are slightly higher than I was expecting to see. And then the other thing, just for Coventry and Warwickshire, was there was a piece of work done at month 8 last financial year in 2023 to compare.
David, I don't think we should talk about UHCW in this forum, if that's what you were just about to do.
I was just going to pick up on George Eliot and Swift.
Okay, that's fine, because I can see there's a table with
UHCW. There is, but I'm not going to pick up on them. It was just to show that there is significant reduction in the volume of work that's undertaken, but in 2022-23 to 19-20, and if we could just get back to 19-20, there would, in ophthalmology, it's different across other specialties, there would be significant benefit.
David, sorry, before you go on, so I'm a little bit confused about what we really think the size of the prize is, given our latest view on the data. Are you saying you think the size of the prize just in cataracts? And I'm looking at page 6 of the 10 you've got. Are you saying that you think the size of the prize is something in the order of over £1 million just for Swift?
If they moved to 9 or 10, yes.
And do you think 9 or 10 is a achievable number?
That's probably not right for a non-clinician to comment on. I think some surgeons definitely could do 9 or 10 in a session.
I thought the guidance on GIRF, David, was 8.
It's actually 8 or 10, Catherine. And 8 is if you've actually got a trainee in there. And most of our clinicians do not have trainees on their cataract lists.
Okay, I'm not going to sort of labour this point, but I'm going to labour this point for a moment. That is a big number in one trust for one speciality. So when we're talking about opportunities, can I ask my COOs, my CMOs and MDs to look just at that one number? I know you're juggling lots of different plates, but that is a big number. And Glenn, what would you like to add before we go back to David?
Yeah, I mean, as you've kind of come in with that point, absolutely. I mean, it's not for David Moon or David Mowbray, who's clinically supporting this, to deliver these things. It is for them to lead the horse to water and show them sometimes how deep the water is or how nice the water is. But we do need COOs particularly to own and sign off what we think the opportunities are. And so I think that dialogue about what do we think is possible, I think particularly with cataracts, there is enough evidence to show that by doing the high volume, low complexity work on dedicated lists can achieve productivity gains, and therefore I think we should be aiming to go those. The other thing I'd just caveat on that headline opportunity is that's income based. It doesn't take account of the cost of delivery.
No, absolutely. And they are only estimates, and they're only estimates based on the data done at a point in time, and that point in time was quite a while ago. So you may have moved and may have already delivered it all. I doubt it.
Okay, guys, can we pop our comments, Jane and Richard, into the chat box, please, because I'm constrained on time. But this is the demonstrating the interest and the importance of this type of deep dive work, which David and I know Chris and others have been involved in. Back with you, David Moon, so we can move.
The only other one I was going to mention was T&O, hip and knee. Now, the problem with this is this is an accountant's estimate, which is probably on the too high side. But there is opportunity, and this is the difference between having a SWAT team at Swift and a low average length of stay, and the opposite at George Eliot and Wye Valley. And this is really about making sure that you deliver at least 2, or up to 2 joints on a 4-hour list. And if you can do that, you get a big gain. Again, this is income. There would be a significant marginal cost that would offset this, so don't get that excited. But it is based on the lowest element of a tariff for a replacement and not a medium estimate, so that there would be a bit more back. But it is estimations. But there is definitely a productivity opportunity, again, more so at George Eliot and Wye Valley in this instance, because Swift still benchmark really well on orthopedics. But it's there. So that's all I wanted to bring up, Chair. We have had a conversation in recent weeks with the COOs on pace, and hopefully moving pace over so it certainly gets picked up at F&P and then monitored that way going forward.
Yeah, and David, I'm sure you're on every COO and surgeon's Christmas card list, producing this type of data. Questions and perspectives. Just before I go to Glenn, I would be really interested to know, if I take a specialist orthopaedic trust like Oswestry, I'd love to know what their productivity is like, given that they would be dealing with some of the more complex people. I think that would be an interesting benchmark as well. Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to pick up Richard Colley's point in the chat about, you know, how we measure this. Actually, most of the evidence shows that it's not necessarily the speed of the operation; it's what goes on in between cases that can lead to delay in theatre. So you can slicken it up, and often the surgeon will say, just give me this team and I can do it. And that's therefore the debate that isn't always as straightforward. But I think what we do need to do, it's one of the reasons why I asked David to do this, is just be really clear about what the size of the prize is. Sign it off as we work through a specialty at a time, and then make sure that we track the delivery of that. And maybe that's the mechanism we just need a little bit more time to think about, maybe a group strategy committee, Russell, but I think that's really important, and it will be part of the CPIC programs of all 3 organisations, but let's make sure we don't miss these opportunities.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Glenn, and there will be a degree of apples and pears. That's why cataracts are really interesting. You know, not much apples and pears in cataract operation. I'm oversimplifying, but there's more apples and pears in hips. But really important piece of work. But when we say that we're nowhere near the envelope of productivity, the foundation group, you guys have an enormous amount to be proud of, but there's still a lot more for us to go after. Unlocking how to get that is difficult, but there's a lot more to go after. There really is. David, thank you very much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for keeping us honest. And if I can just ask, for minute purposes, that we end up in a situation where we're comfortable and apples comparison is available on cataracts, and we see where the productivity numbers are in 6 months. So in 2-3 board meetings time. Thank you. Okay, if we're happy then, really good discussions, guys, and this is what the foundation group is about. It isn't about gilding the lily. It isn't about saying we're all wonderful. It is about pulling out the learnings and the opportunities, even though on occasion that makes us feel uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is good. Joy is transitory, pain is consistent. Foundation group board schedule of business, I will take as read. Any questions on the schedule of business? If you're not happy to approve, could you please raise a digital hand? Okay, duly approved. And then we've got the staff survey results, which we've talked about a lot in each of the individual boards. What would you like to pull out of this, Jeffrey and Gertie?
Thank you, Chair. Well, in fact, Jeffrey and I would like to take the report as read, noting that we have discussed it in detail in each of the individual boards. We can see the summary in terms of where we have opportunities of good practice to share and opportunities to work on things more together. So other than that, Chair, I think we were happy to take any questions. Okay, great. Thank you, Gertie. Questions and perspectives, Glenn?
Obviously, each board has gone through their own results over the last board meetings. Just for the record also, Russ, it's probably worth noting that we used some of the data from this as we looked at the big move on being a very flexible employer, because there's some very relevant questions on that. And it was also interesting to see the different responses by different groups of staff. So there's much more richness of data when you start to drill down by employee types on this one that we can act upon.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenn. And Rosie?
Yes, just a quick question about the survey response rate. I think in the report it mentions strategies are going to be looked at to increase the response rate, because you'll get so much more data and interesting findings from that. But could you tell me a little bit about how you plan to do that? How are you going to get more people to fill the survey in?
Yeah, absolutely, Rosie. So particularly, for example, at George Eliot, the response rate was quite low, quite a bit below average. So there is something about consistently talking about this. We know that people pay attention to what their leaders do. So if we talk about it all year round, not for the 6 weeks before the staff survey, that raises it and becomes part of consciousness. A really important thing about the staff survey is that people need to believe it has an impact. And we did an informal survey last year, and one of the biggest reasons that people told us they didn't fill it in because they didn't believe it made a difference. So again, it's about reinforcing that it makes a difference, that what people tell us is what we act upon, working across a broad range of staff. So you get people to get out there, to get involved in conversations, people that are trusted, so our trade union colleagues, freedom to speak up colleagues, people within the division. So there'll be a range of different actions that are bespoke to each organisation, but predominantly it's about being really clear that the staff survey is one of our most important sources of information that we have in the year. It makes a difference, and trying to get people to see that.
And Jane makes a good point in the chat box. Nicola has been a very senior executive at HSBC for a number of years. I was going to say decades, Nicola, but it makes you sound older than you are. And HSBC effectively regarded as a performance management issue if the staff survey respondents rates are low. And Nicola's helping the Wye Valley team. So Gertie, make sure Jeffrey is sharing that with you. Any other comments on the staff survey work? I think for members of the public, the absolute essence of what we are about in all bits of the foundation group is about being kind and being polite, both with one another and the way we expect citizens to be towards us as well. So that picks up on the absolute essence of the behaviours we're looking for. Okay, team, I think we are then on to any other business. Please raise a digital hand if you have any other business. Okay, can't see any hands raised, so I'll move on then to questions from members of the public, including staff governors from Swift. Sarah Collette, I understand we've had some questions. Erica, have you got Chris's question for me?
I have, Chair. The question's from Chris Lewandowski, who's a regular contributor to the Wye Valley Trust Board. His question is, nationally, there seems to be a shortage of beds for both adult and children needing mental health care. In some areas of the country, this has led to mental health patients, including children, being perhaps inappropriately placed in mainstream hospitals. What is the situation in Herefordshire?
Okay, thank you, Erica. Jane, would you care to answer that? I mean, there is, we know, a national problem, but in Herefordshire in particular?
Yes, there is. So he asks about both adults and children. We we don't often have a problem with adults stranded in acute beds waiting for mental health beds. It happens intermittently, but it's not a large problem. But there is a real problem with young children where it's variable, but it's frequent, that young people with quite severe mental health needs are having to stay in an acute bed as a place of safety, but it isn't the right place to meet their needs, and so it is suboptimal. As I say, sometimes it's 0. I think our maximum has been 3 or 4, so it certainly is a problem. But as Russell says, it's part of a national problem, and I believe there is some national work going on improving capacity for level 4 beds.
Yeah, I'd just like to put on public record my thanks to our frontline teams who have to cope with those extremely emotional and difficult circumstances that arise from children in crisis like that. I know, for example, at Swift, our team have done in the McGregor ward some fantastic going the extra mile bits of work with children in crisis. It isn't right that they're in an acute setting. They need the right setting for their needs, but thank you to all of our staff for their considerable efforts in that regard. Sarah Clett, were there any other questions from either Swift or George Eliot?
Not submitted, Russell, but Mike Flaxman's just put his hand up.
I know. I was just about to open it up and say, are there any questions from members of the public who are with us? Mike?
Thanks, Russell. Educational question really for me. Looking back at the virtual ward presentation, the complex infections ward is quite large, and I have to say I wonder what sort of complex infections could be managed remotely. If someone could just give me some education on that point.
Of course, Mike. Charles?
Yes, basically this is about infections that need to be treated with intravenous antibiotics, and we can put in lines that enable the patients to either inject themselves with training or people to come in and do that. So the sort of infections that can be treated are endocarditis, with infection in the heart, deep-seated infections in the bone and the abdomen, sometimes complicated infections in terms of their antibiotic sensitivity. So, you know, it's a combination of delivering the antibiotics, but oversight from the team, which includes an infectious diseases consultant and specialist nurses.
Thanks, that's very clear. Very helpful, thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Mike. Any other questions from members of the public? Well, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you found it interesting. We look forward to seeing you at the next 3 board meeting, which is, I'm just confirming my date, at which point I will ask, so it's the 2nd of August. The 2nd of August, the sun will be shining. We'll be in a hosepipe ban. Hopefully it will not be too ridiculously hot, but I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at our next 3 board meeting on the 2nd of August. For my executive and non-executive colleagues, given we've got a relatively short confidential board, can I suggest we jump out of this meeting, immediately jump into the confidential board, and I'll try and save you some time. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.